try. Hi, I'm going to try again to do this. Talk about Hanukkah in audio and in video. I hope this works again. My son's not here to help me, but I hope we'll be able to figure this out. I'm so tech challenged. Anyway, as I said, and I'm going to do this one in honor of my very good friends Ann and Robin Hoffman. Whose house last night we had this big Binu Hanukkah Masiba, on behalf of all my supporters and friends and sponsors and so forth. And Robin they do it every year. Ed Hoffman is the number one Jewish caterer here in Baltimore. And I really have to give a shout out not only to him and his wife for hosting the Masiba, but also to Yaakov Feder, their partner, who really did all the work of actually running the affair. Okay, so thank you to all concerned. Thank you, Yaakov. And now, last night I was at the giving a talk, and Tzvi Erzi came over to me, and he mentioned me something about Shemitah and John Hyrcanus and this and that and the other, and it reminded me of an insight I totally forgot about in the book of Maccabees, the very end of the book of First Maccabees, which seems to be so interestingly connected with current events, because right now, obviously, there's a war going on in Gaza, as we know. And one of the most complicating factors of the whole thing is the Chatufim, the hostages. Were they 100 left or something like that? I don't know. Who've undergone the torments of hell, as we all know, ever since October 7th, 2023. We know that. That's Simchas Torah. And you hear rumors back and forth. You never know what's true. You read in the papers, you see in the news that they're having serious discussions. There may be some kind of a peace settlement, or a ceasefire is more accurate. Bibi's insisting on this, the Hamas is insisting on that. They won't give up the names of the hostages, and so on and so forth. And what they're really doing, the Hamas is endeavoring to use the hostages as much as possible to hold it over the head of the Israelis, to force them to agree to some sort of a ceasefire or peace advantageous to the Hamas, because otherwise, what's the point of having a hostage? You want to sell them for the highest price. If you kill them, they're not used anymore. And it's not like the Hamas is nice. So if these people are still alive to whatever degree, they're alive in the sense that I just described as bargaining chips. That's the way they do business in the Middle East. What can I tell you? And Israel has to negotiate within this context. Obviously, the situation is very emotional. I completely get that. And the members of hostage families are saying, do whatever it takes right now to get everybody back. And the government and the right-wingers in the government especially are pushing the opposite direction. Don't give in, because if you give in and you agree to their terms, they'll be disadvantageous for Israel. Lamashal, they're going to give up all the Hamas prisoners in jail. That'll just reconstitute a Hamas army to fight Israel again, which they say they're going to do if they can. And it's very messy and complex. And then based on what Tzvi Erzi told me, I remembered there's an example of this. Isn't it remarkable? As a postscript to the Hanukkah story, involving the successful use of hostages to the advantage of the Israeli forces at that time, the Jewish forces, in such a way that it allowed the perpetrators of the massacre at that time to escape. Now, what am I talking about? So pay attention. Hanukkah, as we're celebrating now, involves the victories of Judah Maccabee and rededication of the temple, etc. But as I pointed out hundreds of times, Hanukkah is not Chanukah hated the war was over. It's an episode in a long war. Started 165 BC. It went on for at least another 30, 40 years. You hear what I just said? No, at least another 30, 40 years. And with the Maccabee brothers, maybe 30 years, something like that. That's a long time. And so, what happened? After Hanukkah, the wars resumed. I've done podcasts in the past. You can look it up. I'm hoping, by the way, sooner or later, not in the distant future, to set up a successful website, and then you'll be able to see by topic all the different podcasts, and you can check out all the Hanukkah ones, for example. By the time this is ready, won't be ready for this Hanukkah, if I'm able to get the right help for setting this website up, make it user-friendly. But anyway, let's put it this way. the wars continued, and Judah Maccabee fell in battle, fighting the Greeks 5 years after Hanukkah in 160 BC. And when that happened, the leadership of Jews was taken up by Judah's brother, Jonathan. So there are 5 brothers, Shimon, Yehuda, Eleazar, Yochanan, and Yonasan. Now, of the 5, Eleazar, remember, fell under the elephant in an early battle. That's a famous story. Yochanan, people don't know this so much unless you look closely, was killed by Arabs in another episode. Killed by a certain group of Arabs, which the Maccabee brothers avenged, etc., etc. So that left 3 brothers: Judah, Jonathan, Simon. Yehuda, Shimon, Yonasan. Judah was just killed in battle, so 2 brothers surviving left. Yonasan, Shimon. Yonasan took control of the independence movement, and skipping all the details, which are many and varied. I don't remember if I've ever done that with you or not. Yonasan was able to expand the Jewish territories by doing what they do in the Middle East right now, which is cooperating with one side, then cooperating with another side. Should Israel side with the Kurds? Should they side with Turkey? Should they side this group or that group? That's the crazy way that these things went. And he was able to buttress the Jewish state. I told you it was at that time. But eventually he got ensnared in the intrigues, and he got killed by a Greek leader, by Tryphon. So there's one left, Shimon. So again, Judah fell in battle, Eleazar fell into the elephant, Yochanan was killed by Arabs. Now Yonasan was killed in a trap by Tryphon. So there's one brother left, Shimon. Okay? Now, by this time, Shimon was able to be careful, build up a large army and all that sort of thing. He it was who got the Jews to sort of have a political convention, we're told, and recognize the Maccabee family as the de facto royal dynasty, the kings, the rulers of the Jews. Maybe they didn't take the title of king. I'm not getting into the Ramban stuff, whether you can be a melech or not from David Melech. I know about the Ramban in next week's Parsha, but I'm talking about what we're told in the historical sources. And he didn't exactly take the title of king, but that's what it was. Commander-in-chief of the army, political leader, called by whatever name you want, but he was the boss. And the people were willing to do this because they had suffered so much under the Greeks. And this family, a great Mesiras Nefesh, they gave it their lives in battle and things like that. So they felt that they earned it and they were the leaders. But even then, the war with the Greeks was not over. The Seleucids. And you went through Demetrius, it was a Tryphon, you went this one and this one. By the time you get to Shimon and Maccabee, being the leader of the Jews, how can I tell you? Antiochus VII was the new boss in Syria. And he didn't like Shimon at all. I'm skipping a lot of details. If you're interested, you have to look at the book of Maccabees itself. It's not so complicated, but I don't want to take up too much time going through all the details. So I'll just say a little bit, okay? Which is, by this time, Shimon is old. Now, mind you, the father, Matisyahu, said that Shimon is the politically smart one. And it turned out, by the way, he was also militarily pretty capable. But his main general was his son, Yochanan, John Hyrcanus, as we call him. And he commanded the army in battle. And what it says in the last passage in the book of Maccabees, that's about 30 years or so after the Hanukkah miracle, was that Yochanan went from Gaza and told his father Shimon about this enemy invasion by the Syrian general Sendebeus. Simon summoned his 2 eldest sons, Judah and John, including Yochanan, and he said, I'm too old, you lead the battle, and so forth and so on. May God be with you. And Yochanan, that's John Hyrcanus, who's a young man, but has grown up in the saddle fighting, which is a whole story by itself. But anyway, he picked 20,000 men, trained for cavalry. That's already interesting. That means that they had a large number of soldiers, 20,000, who were trained. Right? There's a difference between trained soldiers and non-trained. These are veterans. And they marched against Sendebeus. They spend the night at Modi'in, and rising up in the morning, they proceed into the plains. So you know where that is. Modi'in leads you to roughly the area of Tel Aviv, right? And where there was a great army to meet them, infantry and cavalry, and a mountain brook between them, and the Jews on one side and the others on the other side. And Yochanan, being a hero, that's what they're trying to portray over here, he saw his men were afraid to cross the brook, so he crossed over first, and then they did, and he divided the army with the cavalry in the midst of the foot soldiers, because the cavalry of the enemy was very great. So he gives you a little hint of the fact that they were trained soldiers, and they had experience in battle, and they knew tactics of that time. And they sounded the trumpets, and Sendebeus and his army were put to flight, and many were killed. And those who were left fled to the stronghold. Thus it was that Judah, the brother of John, was wounded, meaning of the two sons of Shimon. Yehuda was wounded in the battle, but Yochanan pursued them until he came to Kidron. They fled to the towers in the fields of Ashdod. I think you know where that is. And he burned them down. So in other words, they were hiding in these wooden towers. He burned them all alive. About 2,000 men were killed, and then he returned to Judea in peace. So in other words, it was another Maccabean victory. Okay? I don't know how many invasions this was. Between Antiochus IV and Antiochus V and Lysias and Tryphon and Demetrius and Demetrius II. It's a Chad Gadya. If you want to know what really happened in the time of the Maccabean period, you got to read all that stuff. And it's mainly in the book of Maccabees 1, not in Maccabees 2. Okay? Fine. Then what happened? So you say like this, okay, Hakol Sharvakayim. We won. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, Google in the map. Google a map of Judea in the time of Simon Maccabee. And you'll see that the Jews had already started to recover, bits and pieces of Eretz Yisrael. Right? Simon captured Jaffa. They gave him a port city. He captured parts of the Eber Yarden. Whatever. That's what it was. At this point, something happened. It seems, as far as we can tell, that Simon Maccabee Shimon was looking, because he was a statesman, to solve the problem of the Jewish civil wars. It's bad enough we got the Greeks coming to us all the time, the Seleucids. What about the Jewish civil wars? And there had been the Frum and the Misyavnim and so forth. And by this time, the Maccabees had built up a state. So if you're one of the Misyavnim, you might say for opportunistic reasons, political sagacity, that maybe it wasn't a great idea to go so much against the Jewish religion, and maybe we should try to mend the fences and come to some kind of peace internally between the different factions. Lahavdil, as is going on right now as we speak in Syria, I think. But there's always a problem. Can you trust them? So for better or worse, it seems that Simon Shimon married his daughter, one of his daughters, to the son of a leading family of the Misyavnim, in the hope that they would become from, at least not hurt the Jews. And this son-in-law's name was Ptolemy. That's the Greek name. In the Gemara, you have Ptolemy also. I mean, whatever, it's a common name at that time. Ptolemy, the son of Abubis, Ptolemy ben Chabub. And again, this is Simon trying to restore some kind of stability and repair the civil war that had been taking place so long in Judea. One set of Jews against another was terrible. So he meant well, but he made a mistake. And it goes on now in the end of the book of Maccabees to say the following story. Ptolemy, the son of Chabub, had been appointed general over the plains of Jericho. He possessed a lot of silver and gold because he was the son-in-law of the high priest. So in other words, this guy Ptolemy, who's from a family of the Hellenistic Jews, now said, I'm going to start being a Shomer Shabbos, as we would say today, and I'm marrying the daughter of a Kohen Gadol, of Simon, Shimon Maccabee, the surviving Maccabee brother, who is de facto the king. And to show there's no hard feelings, Shimon appointed him as governor of an important region of Yericho, which at that time had the oil supply. I'm not talking about petroleum, I'm talking about the balsam oil, which was worth a fortune. So he gave him a nice piece of land to rule and make a lot of money off of. But this Ptolemy, the son-in-law, was ambitious. When I'm reading from the Greek of the book of Maccabees. And he wanted to make himself master of the country. So in other words, instead of saying, I got it pretty good over here, I married the daughter of the most powerful Jew, he's given me a nice state to govern with what's going to make a fortune, a lot of silver and gold, and life is good, he said, no, I want to become the king of the Jews. Now, how he could imagine at this point in the Maccabean Wars, which had gone for 30 years, and so much blood, and more blood and guts, and the people who felt on the side of the Maccabees had all lost relatives to the civil wars among the Frum and the Misyavnim. How he imagined he could take control of the country, he must have been a schmo and a half, but he was. And so his heart was ambitious, and wanted to make himself master of the country. He plotted deceitfully against Simon and his sons, so he might put an end to that. So he went into in classic Middle Eastern style. Classic Middle Eastern style. Happens many times in the Middle East. Invite them all to a party and then kill them at the party. And then one blow, you wiped out the whole enemy leadership and was successful. Israel did this recently with the Patriot attack. At least they tried to. They did to a certain degree. That they didn't kill one or two people or maim, cripple one or two people, but thousands, using modern shtick and technology with the Patriot attack. But you know what I'm saying. So I'll invite Shimon and his family, after all, it's my wife's family, to a banquet of some sort or another and kill him at the banquet. And then there'll be no Maccabees left alive. And then there'll be a leadership vacuum, and I will fill the leadership vacuum, and I will become the king of the Jews, and I'll lead them back to Hellenism. Isn't it amazing? Now, Simon was making the rounds of the cities in the country. No, Shimon Maccabee, as the de facto king, was visiting different places and was providing for their needs. So he did it l'shma. He wanted to find out how, as a good ruler should do, what's going in different places in Judea. How can he help? He went down to Jericho with Mattathias and Judah his sons in 177th year, the month of Shabbat. So he went down with two of his sons, the one who was wounded, Judah, and another one named Mattathias. The names are obvious, to visit Jericho, and the fortress of his son-in-law, of his daughter. The son of Chabub deceitfully received them in a little stronghold called Dok, which he had built. So in other words, the son-in-law had built himself a special fortress with a banquet hall. There he held a great banquet for them, and he concealed men there. In other words, like in one of these movies, he had assassins ready all over the place. When Shimon and his sons had drunk freely, after they had 4 cups, Ptolemy and his men arose and took their weapons. Rushing in against Shimon in the banquet hall, they killed him and his 2 sons and some of the servants. So he murdered his father-in-law and his brothers-in-law. Thus he committed an act of great treachery and returned evil for good. So in other words, to say that this is ingratitude is the understatement of the year, but that's how they do business in the Greek politics in those days. The Seleucids did this all the time. Ptolemy wrote about this and sent off to the king, meaning, to show you what a schmo he was, he immediately wrote to the king of the Seleucids in Syria and saying, I just killed Shimon, come invade the country, help me out, and set me up as king, I'll be under your control. Asking him to send troops to help him, and he would deliver them the country and the cities. Isn't this amazing? After all the blood and guts of the Maccabean Wars, and the Hanukkah episode, and all the battles that happened afterwards, and the tortures that are from by the Misyavnim, and the tortures of the Misyavnim by the Frum, went both ways. Okay, there's a lot of that. Now you're starting up again. These people are incorrigible. You just have to understand who you're dealing with. It's incorrigible. It's a certain mafia. And that's what it was. And he sent others to Gaza to do away with John. And he sent letters to the Kilyarchs inviting them to visit him so he might offer them gold and silver and gifts. So in other words, and he sent other men to take over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. They had a whole plot, like the John Wilkes Booth plot. You know, they shot Abraham Lincoln, but they also tried to kill the Secretary of State, and they tried to kill the Vice President, make a complete coup of the top of the federal government. That's what he did over there. So there's a plot, a plan. And the one brother who wasn't at the banquet was Yochanan, John Hyrcanus, the great general. He was at another place called Gezerah. And they immediately, after he murdered Shimon and Shimon's 2 sons, they send assassins to go to Gezer, where John Hyrcanus has no idea what's happening, if you move fast enough, and kill them then there, and you finish off all the Maccabee and all the Hashmonaim. You finish them all off. He also, as it says, had sent letters to the king of Syria, and he also had sent other men to take over Yerushalayim, and a coup d'etat, seize the city and seize the Harabayis, it says, control all the power centers in Judea. However, a man ran ahead to Gaza, however, and told John that his father and brothers were slain and that he sent men to kill you also. Isn't that amazing? In other words, it's really a movie. The miniseries, as I always say. Somebody saw the murder. No, somebody who was in this fortress of dope witnesses. Chapped what was going on. Immediately, it's really a movie. Immediately jumped on a horse, rode like crazy towards Gaza, however far away that was, to warn Yochanan that people are coming. They're going to say they're coming in peace, and then they'll kill you because they just killed your father and brothers. And he beat them. He got them first. No, the good guy got there first. When John heard this, when Yochanan Hyrcanus heard that his brother and parents and all were all killed, he was greatly amazed. And he arrested the men who come to murder and kill them, because he learned that they were seeking to slay him. It's like a Shakespeare play. So the assassins come, pretending to be in peace, but instead of being received by John in friendship, they immediately were arrested, and probably they beat the heck out of them and say, "You come to kill me?" Yes, and he killed them. So that part of the plot didn't work. Now the book concludes the rest of the events of John and the wars and his exploits he performed, and the building of the walls he constructed, and his deeds are written in the chronicles of his high priesthood from the time he came high priest after his father. Notice that's how the book of Maccabees ends, with the frustration of the plot to kill Yochanan and Hyrcanus, John, but the success of the plot in killing Shimon. That's why the Ramban says all the brothers perished violently. The Ramban blames it on the fact they took the Melucha and so forth, but it doesn't matter, right? Even though he says they were Hasidim, they were real Frumies, and they did great things for Klal Yisrael. No question about that. But this is how they perished. So what happens next? We're not told. But Josephus, in his Antiquities, right, carries the story forward. So he obviously had his sources. And it's a heck of a story. He says over here, now he always fluffs it. He could very well have had access to other sources, you know. And he says as follows, talking about Shimon Maccabee, he says, now he was the ruler of the Jews for 8 years, but at a feast he came to his end. It was caused by the treachery of his son-in-law Ptolemy, who also caught his wife and 2 of his sons and kept them in bonds. So it's not exactly what I just described. It is rather, he killed Shimon, but he arrested, like an evil, person. He arrested and tied up his mother-in-law, in other words, Shimon's wife, and the 2 brothers, Mattisiom and Yehuda, who apparently were not killed at the banquet, but were seized and tied up. He also sent men to kill the 3rd son, whose name was Hyrcanus, but the young men, perceiving them coming, avoided the danger that he was in from them and made haste to the city of Jerusalem. So he doesn't tell the story that somebody came to warn him, but in other words, he chapped, and he went to Yerushalayim as relying on the goodwill of the multitude because of the benefits that they received from his father and because of the hatred they had towards Ptolemy. So by the time when Ptolemy was endeavoring to enter the city by another gate, they drove him away as having already admitted John Hyrcanus. So in other words, he killed the assassins that were coming to kill, and he immediately took his men and ran towards Yerushalayim to prevent the coup d'etat. He seized control of the city so that the bad guys wouldn't. He seized control of the Beit HaMikdash so that the bad guys wouldn't. Ptolemy, immediately, according to this, immediately came with men to enter Yerushalayim and take control of it, to carry out the coup d'etat, but he was too late. Okay? Yochanan Hyrcanus was already in control of everything. He said, my father's been murdered. These people are misyabdim. They're trying to turn the clock back. Oh, don't let them succeed. And he was successful in preventing their coup from succeeding, if you caught what I just said. So then what happened? So if you're Ptolemy, you just murdered Shimon, what happens now? So Ptolemy retired to one of the fortresses that was above Jericho, which is called Dagon. I suppose that means Doke, like it says in the other book. But John Hyrcanus, having taken the high priesthood that had been his father's, and in the first place propitiated God by sacrifices, so in other words, Yochanan, the surviving son of Shimon, takes control, immediately gets elected king or Kohen Gadol and commander of the army and all the other titles, takes over as Kohen Gadol and offers karbanos that Josephus doesn't present it correctly and accurately. Propitiated God by sacrifices. Means he brought a minchas chavitin, that a Kohen Gadol has to bring. So in other words, he got himself inaugurated halachically as the head guy, and now he made an expedition against Ptolemy. So now he took an army and marched. Now, how far is it from Yerushalayim to Jericho? It's not far, right? He marched against them, and when he made his attacks on the place, in other points it was too hard for him, but was rendered weaker by him. So in other words, now Josephus is going to use, or the English translation is going to use a lot of old-fashioned English, in which you have the classical diction, two independent clauses constantly separated by semicolons, but we'll try to understand. When he made his attacks on the place, that was when John Hyrcanus attacked the fortress of Ptolemy, and remember, John Hyrcanus' mother and two brothers were still alive. In other points, he was too hard for him, but rendered weaker than he. So really, John Hyrcanus was too hard. He should have, meaning in old-fashioned English, he would have conquered, but he was rendered weaker by the commiseration he had for his mother and brethren, and by that only, which means militarily he could have stormed the fortress and massacred everybody in it. And that's what he would do. You mamzers, you killed my father, you got my brothers, and we're going to come in and take you out. Exactly the way Israel has felt after October 7th. But you had hostages. For Ptolemy, and the hostages were held up like in a movie. If you make another move, I'll cut her throat or something like that. And that prevented John Hyrcanus from acting. For Ptolemy brought them on the wall. Again, is this a movie or not? So Ptolemy, inside the fort, took the mother, still alive, and the brothers, and held them on the wall of the fortress, and tormented them in the sight of all, and threatened that he would throw them down headlong unless Hyrcanus would leave off the siege. And as he sought that, so far as relax the siege and taking of the place, so much favor did he show to those who were dearest to him, by preventing their misery, his zeal about it was cooled. Those are long, complicated sentences, which means that it worked. That Ptolemy said, all right, back off. Okay, back up. So this was a successful example of the cynical use of hostages to prevent the good guys from coming in and doing business and cleaning these mamzers up. Okay? However, again, to make this more like a movie, the mother from the wall says, don't listen to him. Come in and let them kill me. Just take this guy down. I don't care if I die. Which is not what the hostages are saying in Gaza. I just want to say that. His mother spread out her hands and begged of him that he would not grow remiss on her account, but indulge his indignation so much the more. In other words, this guy is such a schmo, and look what he's doing to me in front of you. Forget me, concentrate on taking him out, even if it kills me. The Icarus thing is to take him down. And that he would do his utmost to take the place quickly, in order to get their enemy under his power, and then to avenge upon him what he'd done to those dearest to himself. Okay? So another she said like this, don't worry about me, let him do whatever he wants to me, storm the fortress, you have the forces to do it, and torture him to death. Don't make his death easy. Do to him what he's doing to me right now. For that death would be to her sweet, though with torment, if that enemy of theirs might be brought to punishment for his wicked deeds to them. That's just what I told you. Do whatever it takes to take this mamzer down. Now, when his mother said so, he resolved to take the fortress immediately. So John Hyrcanus said, okay, I'm going to do it. I get it. But when he saw her beaten, so in other words, they saw that every step he took towards prosecuting the siege, not only did they not release the mother, they tortured them more. This is the old days. They poked out an eye, they cut an ear. Who the heck knows what they did? I mean, the mind boggles to think of all the inventive, terrible tortures to your own mother in front of your eyes. You get it? To your own mother. When he saw her beaten and torn to pieces, so the guy started pulling her apart. His courage failed him, and he could not but sympathize with what his mother suffered, and was thereby overcome. So in other words, a classic case. The Chas v'Shalom, I hope the Hamas doesn't do this. They're capable of anything. they could say to Israel, you make another move, and we'll pull this guy's ear off. And we'll chop their, I don't even want to say what they could do. You know and I know they could do what they want. And the siege was drawn out in length by this means. So in other words, it's a Mexican standoff. The Maccabean army under John Hyrcanus is surrounding the fort, but they can't storm it because every time they make some kind of move, he does something else to her. They put, an extra torture on her, and the guy couldn't stand his mother suffering like this. Plus, the year on which the Jews used to rest came on. In other words, this happened to come into a Shemitah year. For the Jews observed this rest every seventh year as they do every seventh day. And therefore, there wasn't a lot of food around. So provisions were hard to maintain the army. A siege requires that the guys on the inside have food and the guys on the outside have food. And the guys on the outside were from, and therefore they couldn't do business with the Shemitah stuff, and there wasn't enough stuff to go around. So that Ptolemy being released from this cause, being for this cause released from the war. So in other words, eventually, John Hyrcanus had to back off and say, you win, because I don't want you to torture my mother more than that. But when John Hyrcanus withdrew his forces, Ptolemy, being the supreme shmo that he was, he slew the brethren of Hyrcanus and the mother. In other words, he didn't let them go. You see, this is how they used the hostages in those cases. Once they won their point, then they killed them, and fled to Zeno, who was called Tyrannus, who was a tyrant of the city of Philadelphia, meaning that he ran away to Amman, Jordan. I mean, that's what Philadelphia is. That's what they call in those days. So basically, let's put it this way: the attempt to use the hostages was successful in the sense that Ptolemy, the killer of Shimon, and most of the Maccabee family got away with it. As far as we know, what happened to him? Nothing. Okay? Let's eat it. Get over it. It was successful. His ruthless use of the torture. Who are we to say what John Hyrcanus should have done? You can't put yourself in his shoes. It's his own mother, his brothers. The same way you and I cannot give advice to Israel. What should they do with the hostages in Gaza? It's not, it's not my mother. You know what I'm saying? It's not my sister. If it was, I totally get how people would feel. Me'idach Gisa, there's another consideration, which is the larger picture, which the mother herself in this story said to do. This guy's going to get away with it. It'll be terrible, all the rest of it. But as far as we can tell from the source that we have, this is the only source. The assassin was successful, not in the big plan, right? The big plan wasn't simply to kill his father-in-law. The big plan was to take over and become the new king of Israel, under the control of the Seleucid dynasty. That's probably, I imagine, how we would have sold it. We're not going to be under the Greeks. The war will be successful. I'll be the king. But you and I know he would be from the Misyavnim. You know what I'm saying? That didn't work. Instead, Yochanan Hyrcanus became the king and the Kohen Gadol. That's the Yochanan Kohen Gadol you find in Mishnais, who made Demai and all these other things. And Kol Yom of Hoyabena Prushim B'Sof Yom Nasaman Atzadukin. It's that famous person. Again, in the 31 year, I think it was, reign of John Hyrcanus, the Syrian attempt to suppress the Jewish state did not work. As a matter of fact, Antiochus VII came immediately and besieged Jerusalem. And again, leaving out all the details, it was not successful. And then John Hyrcanus went on the offensive, and he tripled the size of Judea. Hear what I said? He more than doubled it, because he conquered Shomron, the central part of Israel, and Hebron area, which they called at that time Edom, Idumea. He forcibly converted the Edomites, and he added other territory. He knows he was a fairly powerful military figure, without going into the rest of the stuff of John Hyrcanus' reign. But look at the example we have in the postscript to the Hanukkah story about the ruthless but successful use of hostages in playing hardball. Do you know what the Hamas in the best case scenario is going to do with the hostages? Are they simply going to release them? Halavai, they should. I wish that Israel would rescue them tomorrow, obviously. But the story I just said is, in my mind, definitely food for thought as we're coming close to the end of Hanukkah is here, but we're not coming close to the end of the war in Gaza, and we're not coming close to the end of the fate of the hostages unless we are, right? So we're just bystanders and observers. But it certainly gives us a lot to consider uh, in terms of choices to make and sacrifices to make. And listen, we Jews are softy. I mean, when it comes, like I said before, I don't want any of these hostages to suffer more than they've suffered. They've suffered terribly until now. You know it, and I know it. So anyway, I thought that that's just a very interesting point to bring up from our past as we're coming to the latter part of Hanukkah and we start to think post-Hanukkah and historically what was it like post-Hanukkah. And it wasn't a Dover Pasha at all. So I just wanted to share those thoughts. Again, this was stirred in my mind by Tzvi Urzi, who I saw last night. And I want to thank, as I said before, our sponsors, which is Ed and Robin Hoffman. They're not sponsoring, I'm doing it in their honor. And I do want to mention Yaakov Fader, all of whom come by last night to make a really great event. And I hope we hear Besuras Tovas, obviously concerning the hostages and the Jewish soldiers and somehow or other, the war in Gaza should be brought to some kind of successful end. Because it goes on, and I'm talking about the korbanos we're suffering. I'm talking about the other side. It's a more complicated question. And with that, I wish you all a Hanukkah Sameach.